Back here at the Hall of History, excuse me, looking at the look at the early 1950s, and the Cold War heats up. Well, the first part of the heating up of the Cold War was a civil war broke out in China between the nationalists led by Chiang Kai-shek and the communists by Mao Zedong. And as you can probably guess, we backed the nationalist government because they were not communists. It was interesting to note the United States, and again, this is this whole idea of democracy versus communism. The United States supported the nationalists, the Soviet Union, the communists, and it's interesting, we didn't agree with all the policies of the nationalists, but they were not communists, so the United States would support them. And this theme kind of goes on through the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Many of these countries were supported. Some of their activities were not well thought of, but they were not going to be communists, and so the United States did support them. Well, the outcome of all this, and you'll probably get more of this in world history, was the nationalists are forced out of the mainland, and they end up forming going to the island of Taiwan. And we still support this island nation to this day. Well, the United States were stunned that the containment failed. We were really worried about the whole thing, what's called the domino theory. Once one country went down, there would be other countries in the area that would also turn to communism. And this fear of communism was real, it was palpable, and it was only getting worse after the events in Korea. We're going to take a brief look at the Korean War here, but you do have another PowerPoint to watch, and this week we'll be looking at the Korean War more detailed. Quite often this is called the Forgotten War, and we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at it. At the end of World War II, after Japan surrendered, the dividing line of Korea was the 38th parallel. You had the communists in the north and democracy to the south. Here's a brief timeline of what happened here. You can go ahead and read this. We're going to look at this in a little bit more detail as we go through the week. Well, the outcome, many casualties, 54,000 casualties. The increased fear of communist aggression, and it was also the creation of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. After the whole Korean War, essentially it went back to the 38th parallel, and that 38th parallel is the dividing line, and it is still in existence today, and that is the dividing line between North and South Korea. And as I mentioned, we're going to look at that in a little more detail during the course of the week. An interesting term here is blacklisting, and this was prevalent in the mid-50s here, condemning a person for having communist sympathies or a background. The whole ideas of spies were going on this time, and maybe the most famous of these were the Rosenbergs, and they were convicted of giving the Soviet Union information about the atomic bomb. And they claimed they were being persecuted because they were Jewish and minor members of the Communist Party. At this time, it really didn't matter too much with the fervor over the whole fear of communism, and the couple was executed in June of 1953. Also going on at this time was the McCarthy witch hunt. I guess maybe not too unlike the Salem witch trial, but there were attacks on anybody suspected of having communist-leaning sympathies during the 50s. Again, there was very little evidence typically brought forth against these people. Many people in the film industry were brought forth on charges on McCarthyism, and he claimed that the United States government was really going to be taken over by the communists, and that the Democratic Party was a communist-friendly organization. As you can read here, millions were investigated. Definitely the labor unions were thought to have communist-leaning sympathies. And eventually this started to fade when McCarthy, who was a senator, started making accusations against the Army. And also people saw him at television, started to get more into in the vogue here, and people saw some of his rants and his raves on television. They were not too impressed what was going on here. And you got to remember, you start making accusations against the Army, who just won World War II, who also just fought in the Korean War. That was not a very popular opinion at this time. All right, there's our look at this. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the Korean War more during this week.